The moment Clara Reyes stepped through the iron gates of the Cross estate, she knew her life would never be the same, but not for the reasons she imagined. The mansion loomed before her like a sleeping giant, all glass and marble and secrets, and somewhere inside, a man who had made billions by trusting no one was about to put her through a test that would destroy everything she thought she understood about right and wrong. Ethan Cross didn't believe in second chances. He had fired 23 staff members in 18 months, each one dismissed without explanation, their belongings packed and waiting at the door before they even knew what hit them. The rumors spread through the employment agencies like wildfire: work for Ethan Cross and you'd either get rich or get ruined, but you'd never get comfortable. Clara heard the warnings. She took the job anyway. Her 14-year-old brother Miguel needed medication she couldn't afford on a waitress salary, and the Cross estate paid 3 times the going rate for domestic staff. Desperation made people brave, and Clara was desperate enough to walk into a lion's den with nothing but her work ethic and a prayer. Her first week passed in a blur of polishing floors that already gleamed, dusting artwork worth more than her childhood home, and avoiding eye contact with a man who moved through his own mansion like a ghost. Ethan Cross was 36, handsome in that sharp-edged way that came from too many boardroom battles and completely untouchable. He never smiled. He never made small talk. He watched everyone with eyes that calculated worth down to the penny, and Clara felt his gaze on her more than once, measuring, judging, waiting for her to fail. On Friday night everything changed. Clara was assigned the late shift, cleaning the West Wing while the rest of the skeleton staff went home. The mansion felt different after dark, all shadows and echoes, and she moved through the halls with practiced quiet, her cleaning cartwheels barely whispering against the marble. She was heading toward the grand living room when she heard his voice, sharp and irritated, cutting through the silence. Ethan was on a business call, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city lights stretched out like fallen stars. Clara hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether to enter or wait, but he waved her in without looking, still barking orders into his phone about quarterly reports and hostile takeovers and things Clara didn't understand. She started dusting the far end of the room, making herself invisible the way good help always did, but she couldn't help stealing glances at him. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his normally perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of money could fix. The call went on for another 20 minutes, his voice getting harder and colder with each passing minute, until finally he ended it with a curt goodbye and tossed his phone onto the leather couch. He sank down beside it, leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Clara kept cleaning, moving even more quietly now, but after a few minutes she realized his breathing had changed. It was slower, deeper, the kind of breathing that only came with sleep. She glanced over and saw him completely still, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, his hand draped loosely over the armrest. He had fallen asleep sitting up, something she'd seen Miguel do 1,000 times when exhaustion finally caught up with him. She felt a strange pang of sympathy. Even billionaires were human apparently. That's when she noticed the items scattered around him. His phone lay face up on the cushion beside him, unlocked and glowing. His wallet sat on the coffee table, thick with cash and credit cards that probably had no limit. And there, almost carelessly placed on top of a stack of papers, was a check already signed in his bold handwriting, the amount line completely blank. Clara froze mid-reach, her dust cloth hanging forgotten in her hand. She stared at that check like it was a snake ready to strike. Anyone could walk in here. Anyone could take it. Anyone could write any number they wanted and Ethan Cross would never know until it was too late. Her heart started pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought about Miguel's medication, the bills piling up on her kitchen counter, the eviction notice she'd hidden in her drawer so he wouldn't worry. She thought about how easy it would be to pocket that wallet, to slip one credit card into her apron, to write just enough on that check to change everything. Her hand actually moved toward it, fingers trembling, before she snatched it back like she'd been burned. What was she thinking? This wasn't her. This would never be her. But God, it was tempting in a way that made her chest ache. Clara took 3 steps back and forced herself to breathe. She looked at Ethan, still sleeping peacefully, completely vulnerable, and something shifted in her chest. This man had everything and trusted nothing, and maybe that's why he left himself exposed like this, because he expected the worst from everyone and wanted to be proven right. Well, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. She set down her cleaning supplies and moved with quiet purpose. First, she walked to the windows and drew the heavy curtains closed, blocking out the city lights and the prying eyes of anyone who might look in from the grounds. Then she dimmed the lights until the room was wrapped in soft shadows. She found a cashmere throw blanket draped over a chair and carefully laid it over Ethan's sleeping form, tucking it gently so it wouldn't wake him. Then Clara did something that would change everything. She picked up a chair from the corner of the room and positioned it near the doorway, settling into it with her back straight and her eyes on both Ethan and the valuables. She wasn't going to steal from him. But she also wasn't going to let anyone else get the chance. If someone came in with bad intentions, they'd have to go through her first. It was crazy. It was probably going to get her fired. But it was the right thing to do, and Clara had learned a long time ago that doing the right thing was the only way she could sleep at night. She sat there for 45 minutes, her legs cramping and her mind racing, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Then she heard footsteps in the hall, heavy and unfamiliar. A man appeared in the doorway, wearing a delivery company uniform and carrying a small package. He had a tablet in his other hand and barely glanced at Clara before his eyes locked onto the wallet and phone. His expression changed. Clara saw it happen, that flicker of greed that people thought they could hide but never quite managed. He stepped into the room, setting the package down but not leaving, his gaze sliding over to the coffee table again. "I can sign for that," Clara said quietly, standing up and moving between him and Ethan. Her voice was steady even though her pulse was hammering. The delivery man looked at her like she'd just materialized out of thin air. "What?" he said. Clara crossed her arms. "The package. I'll sign for it. Mr. Cross is resting and shouldn't be disturbed." The man's jaw tightened. "I need his signature specifically. Company policy." It was a lie. Clara could see it in his eyes, in the way his hand drifted toward the coffee table like it had a mind of its own. "Then you'll have to come back tomorrow during business hours," Clara said firmly. "I'm not waking him up." The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds but felt like an eternity. The delivery man was bigger than her, angrier, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a horrible moment Clara thought he might actually try to push past her, and she wasn't sure what she'd do if he did. But she held her ground, her chin up, her eyes locked on his, and something in her absolute refusal to back down made him reconsider. He snatched up his tablet with a curse under his breath and stormed out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall like thunder. Clara's legs almost gave out. She sat back down in her chair, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, and checked on Ethan. Still asleep. Still breathing. Still completely unaware of what had just happened. She stayed there another hour, watching him, protecting him, until finally he began to stir. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he took in the darkened room, the blanket, the chair positioned by the door. He sat up and his gaze landed on Clara like a laser sight. "What are you doing?" His voice was cold, flat, the voice of a man who had caught someone red-handed. Clara stood up quickly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. You fell asleep and I didn't want to leave you." "I didn't ask for a blanket," Ethan interrupted. "I didn't ask for the lights to be dimmed. I certainly didn't ask for you to sit there watching me sleep like some kind of stalker." The words hit Clara like a slap. "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Ethan stood up, and even though he was rumpled from sleep, he somehow looked more intimidating than ever. "You were supposed to clean and leave. That's your job. Not to touch my things, not to rearrange my space, and definitely not to stand guard like I need a babysitter." Clara felt her face burning. "Someone came in. A delivery man. He was looking at your wallet and phone and I didn't think." "You didn't think," Ethan agreed icily. "That's exactly right. You overstepped. You interfered. You disobeyed direct instructions about how to conduct yourself in this house." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up his phone and wallet, checking them like he expected something to be missing. Clara's stomach twisted. She had done the right thing. She knew she had. But looking at Ethan's face now, all she saw was cold fury and disappointment. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. Ethan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I don't need protection. What I need is staff who know their place and follow orders. Clearly you're not capable of that." The silence that followed was devastating. Clara opened her mouth to argue, to explain, to make him understand, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He had already made up his mind. "You're fired," Ethan said flatly. "Effective immediately. HR will process your final paycheck and mail it to you. Leave your uniform and access card with security on your way out. Clara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Mr. Cross, please. That's all, Miss Reyes. He turned his back on her, dismissing her as completely as if she'd never existed, and Clara knew there was no coming back from this. She walked out of that mansion with tears streaming down her face, past security guards who wouldn't meet her eyes, through gates that clanged shut behind her like a prison door, and out into a night that suddenly felt impossibly dark. She took the bus home because she couldn't afford a cab, her mind spinning with disbelief and grief. She had lost the one job that could have saved everything. Miguel's medication would run out in 3 days. The rent was due in 5. And all because she had tried to do the right thing, because she had protected a man who clearly didn't want or need her protection, because she had been stupid enough to think loyalty meant anything in a world run by people like Ethan Cross. By the time she reached her tiny apartment, the tears had dried but the despair hadn't. She let herself in quietly so she wouldn't wake Miguel and sank down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, trying to figure out how she was going to survive this. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Ethan Cross stood in his security office watching footage from the hidden cameras he'd had installed throughout the house. He watched Clara enter the living room and freeze when she saw the valuables. He watched her hand reach out and then pull back. He watched her close the curtains, dim the lights, cover him with a blanket. He watched her sit down in that chair and position herself like a guardian angel between him and the door. He watched the delivery man enter. A man Ethan himself had hired to play the part, to create the temptation to be the final test. And he watched Clara refuse to back down even when she was clearly terrified. Every other person Ethan had tested over the past 18 months had failed. Some ignored him completely and cleaned around him like he was furniture. Others took small things, $20 from his wallet, a pen, a watch, thinking he'd never notice. A few had been bold enough to pocket the blank check, their greed so naked it was almost impressive. But Clara had done none of those things. Clara had protected him. Clara had put herself at risk for a man who paid her minimum wage and treated her like she was invisible. Clara had shown him something he thought didn't exist anymore. Genuine, unconditional loyalty that asked for nothing in return. And he had just fired her for it. Ethan sat down heavily in his desk chair and replayed the footage again, his chest tight with something he didn't quite recognize. Might have been shame. Might have been regret. It might have been the first real emotion he'd allowed himself to feel in years. He watched Clara's face on the screen, watched the way she stood her ground, watched the hurt in her eyes when he dismissed her. And for the first time since he'd started these tests, Ethan wondered if he'd been testing the wrong thing all along. Maybe loyalty wasn't about who stayed when things were easy. Maybe it was about who fought for you when you were too broken to fight for yourself. He was still sitting there at 3 a.m. when he noticed something strange. The security footage showed Clara returning to the main office before she left, slipping inside when no one was watching. Ethan pulled up that camera angle and watched as she took an envelope from her bag, the advance payment she'd received at the start of the week, and left it on his desk along with a handwritten note. He hadn't seen it yet. It was still there waiting for him. Ethan left the security office and walked through the silent mansion to his main study. The envelope sat exactly where Clara had left it, her last week's wages that she desperately needed, returned in full. He picked up the note with hands that weren't quite steady and read the words written in simple, clear handwriting. I couldn't protect you if I stayed silent. Loyalty means doing what's right, not what's easy. I'm sorry I disappointed you. I hope you find someone worthy of your trust. Clara Reyes. Ethan read it 3 times before the full weight of what he'd done crashed into him like a tidal wave. She hadn't just passed his test. She had exposed how fundamentally broken his entire system was, how his paranoia and distrust had turned him into exactly the kind of person who punished goodness and rewarded suspicion. He had built an empire on the belief that everyone had a price, that loyalty could be bought or broken, that trust was a weakness only fools indulged in. And then this 24-year-old maid with nothing to her name had proven him wrong in the most devastating way possible. She had shown him what real integrity looked like, and it had cost her everything. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with Clara's note in his hands and the security footage playing on loop on his laptop, and he made a decision that surprised even himself. At 6 a.m. he got in his car, not the town car with the driver but his own vehicle that he barely remembered how to operate, and drove to the address HR had on file for Clara Reyes. The neighborhood made his security team nervous when he'd pulled her background check, but in the pale morning light it just looked tired, a place where people worked 3 jobs and still couldn't get ahead. He found her apartment building, climbed the stairs because the elevator was broken, and knocked on her door before he could talk himself out of it. Clara opened it with her eyes still puffy from crying and shock written all over her face. Mr. Cross. She was wearing pajamas and looked about 16 years old, and Ethan suddenly felt like the world's biggest monster. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. Clara glanced back into the apartment where a teenage boy was sleeping on the couch, then stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door closed. "If this is about the money I left, I wasn't trying to make a statement. It was a test," Ethan interrupted. "Last night. All of it. The phone, the wallet, the check, even the delivery man. I was testing you. And you passed. And I fired you anyway because I'm an idiot who's forgotten what actual human decency looks like." Clara stared at him like he just admitted to being an alien. You tested me? By pretending to sleep. I've done it to everyone I've hired in the past year and a half, Ethan admitted. You're the first person who didn't either ignore me or rob me. You're the first person who acted like I was a human being worth protecting instead of a resource to be exploited. And instead of thanking you, I punished you for caring. He pulled out the note she'd left and held it up. "This destroyed me. You gave back money you obviously need because your principles matter more than your survival. When was the last time I met someone like that? When was the last time I was someone like that?" Clara wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost and uncertain. "I don't understand what you want from me." "I want to offer you a job," Ethan said. "Not as a maid. As head of household security ethics and staff training. I want you to help me rebuild the culture in that mansion so it's not a prison full of people waiting to betray each other. I want you to teach me how to trust again because clearly I've forgotten." He took a breath. "And I want to apologize. For the test. For the cruelty. For treating you like you were disposable when you're probably the most valuable person who's ever walked through my door." Clara looked at him for a long moment and Ethan saw the wheels turning in her mind, saw her weighing her desperate need against her pride, saw her trying to decide if he was serious or if this was just another test she was doomed to fail. "I have one condition," she said finally. Ethan nodded. "Name it." "No more tests. No more traps. No more games. If you can't trust your staff, fire them. But don't torture them with psychological experiments and then act surprised when they fail. That's not loyalty testing. That's just cruelty with a fancy name." The words were harsh but fair and Ethan took them without flinching. "You're right. I agree. No more tests." Clara searched his face like she was looking for the lie, the catch, the moment when he'd pull the rug out from under her again. But whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she slowly nodded. "Hey, I'll take the job. But I need advance payment for my brother's medication and I need it today, not in 2 weeks when payroll processes." "Done," Ethan said immediately. "I'll have it transferred within the hour." "What else?" Claire almost smiled. "A contract. In writing. With everything we just agreed to spelled out so there's no confusion later." "Smart," Ethan said, and this time when he smiled it was real, the first genuine expression she'd ever seen on his face. "You're going to be good at this job." 2 hours later, Clara walked back through the gates of the Cross estate, but this time everything was different. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was dressed in the professional clothes Ethan had sent someone to buy while their lawyers drafted the contract, and she walked through the front door with her head high and her purpose clear. The staff who had barely noticed her before stopped and stared as Ethan himself gave her a tour of the security office, the staff quarters, the training facilities she'd be overseeing. Word spread through the mansion like wildfire. The maid who got fired yesterday was back today as their boss, and nobody could figure out what kind of magic she'd worked to pull that off. But Clara didn't care about their confusion or their whispers. She had a job to do, a brother to take care of, and a billionaire to teach about the difference between loyalty and control. As she settled into her new office and started reviewing staff files, she caught Ethan watching her from the doorway with an expression that might have been respect or might have been something more dangerous. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a second chance." Clara looked up and met his eyes. "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to challenge every assumption you have about how to treat people. And I'm going to hold you accountable when you slip back into old habits." Ethan's smile was sharp and maybe a little bit sad. "I'm counting on it." He left her there surrounded by files and possibilities, and Clara took a deep breath and opened the first employee record. She had no idea if this was going to work. She had no idea if a man as broken as Ethan Cross could really change or if she was just setting herself up for another devastating disappointment. But she knew one thing for certain. She had walked into this mansion desperate and powerless, and she was walking out of this office with authority and purpose. That had to count for something. That had to mean the risk was worth taking. Outside her window, the sun climbed higher over the Cross estate, burning off the morning fog and illuminating all the hidden corners that had festered in shadow for too long. Somewhere in the mansion, Ethan was having the same realization, staring at security footage that showed him exactly who he'd become and forcing himself to decide if he had the courage to be someone different. The answer wasn't clear yet. The transformation wasn't complete. But for the first time in 18 months, the Cross estate held something besides suspicion and fear. It held the fragile, terrifying possibility of trust, and neither Clara nor Ethan was sure if they were strong enough to protect it or foolish enough to believe in it, but they were going to try anyway.